What drives a person to abandon a child in the wilderness? Not just to leave her, but to tie a sign around her neck, a message of pure cruelty, for the world to see not worth feeding. In the unforgiving heart of the 1888 Montana Territory, a man who had lost everything, a cowboy made rich by silver, but bankrupted by sorrow, stumbles upon this very girl. He thought his heart was buried forever with his family, but this small, silent child, marked by a sin that wasn't her own, is about to unearth a secret far darker than a simple abandonment. It's a secret of greed murder and a fortune written in blood, and this little girl is the final witness. This isn't just a story of rescue. It's the story of a war for a soul. The land around Levi McRae's ranch was a testament to God's grandeur and his indifference. The Montana sky was a vast, unforgiving canvas of blue stretched taut over the jagged peaks of the Garnet Range. Below it, sprawling plains of buffalo grass whispered secrets to the wind. Secrets of harsh winters, fleeting summers, and the bones of creatures that hadn't been strong enough to endure them. Levi, or Levi as he was known to the few who still spoke to him, understood this land. He was a part of it, carved from the same McRae and dust. At 42, his face was a road map of his life, the lines around his eyes etched by the relentless sun. The grim set of his jaw a memory of a loss so profound it had hollowed him out from the inside. He was the proprietor of the Solitude Ranch, a name that had once been a bitter joke, but was now a simple statement of fact. His wealth, a shocking and uncomfortable reality for a man of his nature, came not from the cattle that dotted his land like stubborn brown boulders, but from the earth itself. The Sarah's Gift silver mine, named for his late wife, had struck a vein so pure it had made him one of the territory's richest men. It had also made him a target of envy, suspicion, and a solitude as deep and cold as the mine shaft itself. The wealth was a curse. Every silver dollar that came from that dark hole in the mountain felt like a coin laid over a dead man's eyes. It hadn't saved his Sarah, nor their 6-year-old daughter Lily, from the cholera that had swept through Black Creek 3 years prior. It had only bought them finer caskets and a larger plot on the hill overlooking the town, a town Levi now avoided like the plague it had once hosted. His days were a ritual of hard labor and silence. He rode the fences, his powerful stallion Odin, his only constant companion. He worked alongside his 2 ranch hands, a pair of quiet brothers who took his silver and asked no questions and communicated mostly through nods with his housekeeper, Maria Vargas. Maria, a widow herself, understood grief and left him to its grim embrace, ensuring only that he ate and that his home didn't fall to ruin around him. It was on a Tuesday in late August, under a sky the color of faded denim, that the ritual was broken. Levi was riding the western perimeter, where his land met the whispering waters of Flint Creek. It was a place he seldom visited, a place where he and Sarah had once picnicked, where Lily had chased grasshoppers with shrieks of delight. The memories here were sharp like shards of glass in his heart. Odin suddenly stopped, his ears twitching, his head raised. Levi pulled from his reverie, scanned the creek line. The air was still save for the buzz of insects and the gentle murmur of the water. Then he saw it. A splash of color that didn't belong. A small hunched shape near a copse of cottonwood trees, its back to him. "Easy, boy," Levi murmured, his hand resting on Odin's neck, his eyes narrowing. It was too small to be a man, too still to be a deer, a stray calf, perhaps. He nudged Odin forward, the horse stepping carefully over the rocky terrain. As he drew closer, the shape resolved itself. It was a child, a little girl sitting on the damp earth, her dress a faded calico blue, torn and stained. Her hair was a tangled mat of sun-bleached straw. A cold dread, a feeling he hadn't experienced since the doctor had shaken his head and walked away from Sarah's bedside, washed over him. He dismounted his boots, sinking into the soft soil. The child didn't move. She didn't look up. It was as if she were a statue, a tragic monument to some forgotten sorrow. "Hello." His voice was rough, rusty from disuse. No response. He took another step and another until he was standing just a few feet away. He could see her small shoulders, impossibly thin, trembling ever so slightly. And then he saw the sign. It was a crude piece of splintered wood hung around her neck with a length of rough twine. The letters were scrawled in what looked like charcoal, stark and brutal. "Not worth feeding." The words struck Levi with the force of a physical blow. He felt the air leave his lungs. It wasn't just a statement. It was a damnation. A judgment passed on a life so small it had barely begun. He had seen cruelty in his life, bar fights, range wars, the casual brutality of men against beast. But this was something else. This was a cold, calculated act of soul-crushing malice. He knelt, his own aches and pains forgotten. His shadow fell over her, and for the first time, she flinched. She drew her knees up to her chest, making herself even smaller. "I'm not going to hurt you," Levi said, his voice softer, now gentler than he had known he was still capable of. "My name is Levi. What's yours?" She remained silent, her face hidden behind the curtain of her filthy hair. Her hands were raw and red, her fingernails broken. He reached out slowly, his large, calloused hand hovering in the air, before he gently touched the twine around her neck. She flinched again, but didn't pull away. With a surgeon's care, he worked the knot loose and lifted the sign from her shoulders. He held it in his hand, the splintered wood digging into his palm. A wave of white-hot fury, an emotion he thought had been buried with his family, surged through him. Who could do this? What kind of monster? He tossed the sign away, watching it clatter against the rocks. When he looked back at the girl, he saw her face for the first time as she peeked through her hair. She was pale, her cheeks sunken, but her eyes were a startling clear shade of cornflower blue. They were water with a terror so absolute it seemed to have burned away every other expression. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, the same age as Lily would have been. The thought hit him like a stray bullet. Lily. He had to swallow hard against the lump forming in his throat. He couldn't let that memory swamp him now. This child was real and she was in trouble. "You're safe now." He said the words, feeling foreign and yet necessary. "You're safe with me." He shrugged off his heavy duster and gently wrapped it around her. She was as light as a bundle of sticks. As he lifted her into his arms, she gave a tiny, almost inaudible whimper, a sound of pure exhaustion and fear. She didn't fight him. She didn't have the strength. She simply sagged against his chest, her small head resting on his shoulder. As he carried her back to Odin, the warmth of her small body seeped through his shirt, a warmth he hadn't felt in 3 long years. He mounted the horse with practiced ease, settling her in front of him, her small frame cradled against his. She smelled of dust, river water, and neglect. The ride back to the ranch was a blur. Levi's mind, usually a quiet, orderly place, was a maelstrom of rage and a strange, terrifying tenderness. The weight of the child in his arms was both a comfort and an agony. Each breath she took was a whisper of the daughter he'd lost, each tremor a reminder of the cruelty of the world he had tried so hard to shut out. When he rode into the ranch yard, Maria was on the porch, shaking out a rug. She froze, her eyes widening at the sight of the small, bedraggled bundle in Levi's arms. "Madre de Dios," she breathed, dropping the rug and rushing down the steps. "Levi, what is this, woman?" "Get the spare room ready, Maria," Levi said, his voice tight. "And heat some water, a lot of it, and some broth. Thin broth." He didn't wait for an answer. He carried the girl inside through the living room that was more museum than home, its furniture draped in white cloths, its air thick with the dust of disuse. He took her to the room that had once been Lily's, a room he hadn't entered since the day he'd carried her out of it for the last time. He gently laid her on the bed, the small quilt with its faded sun and moon pattern, a stark contrast to her grimy appearance. She curled into a ball instantly, her eyes still wide, tracking his every move. Maria appeared in the doorway, her face a mixture of shock and pity. "Who is she?" "I don't know." Levi set his back to her, his gaze fixed on the child. "I found her by the creek. She had a sign around her neck." He didn't need to say what it said. The look on his face was enough. Maria's hand flew to her mouth, her dark eyes filling with tears. "Who would do such a thing?" "I intend to find out." Levi vowed the words like iron in the silent room. Over the next few hours, they worked with a quiet efficiency. Levi sat with the girl, while Maria prepared the bath and the food. He spoke to her in a low, steady voice, telling her about Odin, about the mountains, about nothing in particular, just filling the terrifying silence. She never responded, never made a sound. But her eyes remained fixed on him, two blue flames in the pale landscape of her face. When the bath was ready, Maria took over. Levi waited outside the door, pacing the hallway like a caged wolf. He could hear the gentle splashing of water and Maria's soft, crooning Spanish, a language of comfort and lullabies. He heard no crying, no protest, only silence. When Maria finally emerged, she was carrying a bundle of filthy, torn clothes. "She is clean, and I have put one of Lily's old nightgowns on her. It is a little big. She is so thin, Levi. Like a bird." Levi nodded, his throat too tight to speak. "She has bruises on her arms." Maria continued, her voice trembling with anger. "Old ones, and a scar on her back, a burn, I think. It is old, too." She looked him straight in the eye. "This has been happening for a long time." Levi's fists clenched at his sides. He went back into the room. The girl was tucked into the bed, the covers pulled up to her chin. Her wet hair was plastered to her scalp, a shade darker now, more brown than blonde. She looked cleaner, but somehow even more fragile. A bowl of broth sat untouched on the bedside table. He sat in the chair beside the bed, the one Sarah used to sit in, to read Lily to sleep. The sun was setting, painting the room in hues of orange and purple. He sat there for hours long after the sky had turned a deep star-dusted black. He didn't sleep. He just watched her breathe. In and out. A small, miraculous rhythm in the vast, crushing silence of his life. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, she made a sound. a soft, terrified whimper. Her hands were clutching the quilt, her knuckles white. A nightmare. Levi leaned forward, his instincts taking over. "Shh," he whispered. "It's all right. You're safe. No one's going to hurt you anymore." He reached out and gently rested his hand on her forehead. It was cool. No fever. Thank God, no fever. At his touch, she didn't recoil. Instead, the tension in her small body seemed to lessen just a fraction. She settled back into the pillows, her breathing evening out. Levi McCrae, the rich, lonely cowboy of Black Creek, sat in the dark, his hand on the head of a nameless, abandoned girl, and felt the first crack appear in the frozen wall around his heart. He didn't know her name, or where she came from, or who had cast her aside like trash. But as he sat there, a silent sentinel in the house of his grief, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had been given a new vow to keep. He would find the monster who wrote that sign, and he would make them pay. He owed it to the memory of his own daughter, and he owed it to the living, breathing child in her bed. The first light of dawn found Levi still in the chair, his neck stiff, his body aching, but his mind clearer than it had been in years. The child he needed a name for her, even a temporary one, was still asleep. He had taken to calling her Sparrow in his mind, for she was small, fragile, and had somehow survived against all odds. He left the room quietly, closing the door behind him, with a soft click. In the kitchen, Maria was already awake, a pot of coffee brewing on the stove, its rich aroma a welcome intrusion into the stale air of the house. "How is she?" Maria asked, her voice low. "Sleeping," Levi replied, pouring himself a mug of the black coffee. "She had a nightmare, but she settled. Hasn't touched the broth." "Paciencia," Maria counseled. "Patience. The fear is a poison. It takes time to leave the body." She nodded towards the front door. "You will go to town?" "Have to," Levi confirmed. "Sheriff Brody needs to know. A crime's been committed. An official one." An hour later, Levi was riding Odin towards Black Creek. He'd left the ranch in the capable hands of Maria, instructing her not to let anyone near the house. The thought of leaving the girl, even for a few hours, settled in his gut like a lead weight. For 3 years he had felt nothing but the dull ache of memory. Now, in less than a day, he was consumed by a fierce, protective anxiety. Black Creek was a town caught between its rugged past and an uncertain future. A single dusty main street was lined with a mix of weathered false front buildings and newer brick establishments. A saloon, a general store, a land office, and the sheriff's office, which was little more than a cramped room with 2 holding cells in the back. As Levi dismounted, tying Odin to the hitching post, he felt the familiar weight of eyes on him. The townsfolk still saw him as an enigma, the grieving hermit who had stumbled into a fortune. They whispered about him, their curiosity mixed with resentment. Today, however, their stares felt different, sharper. News in a town this size traveled faster than a prairie fire. The sight of Levi McCrae riding into town for something other than supplies was an event. Sheriff Brody was a man growing old before his time. His face was perpetually weary, his gut strained, the buttons of his vest and his drooping mustache seemed to carry the weight of every petty crime and drunken brawl in the county. He looked up from his paperwork as Levi entered, his expression shifting from surprise to wary attention. "Levi," Brody said, leaning back in his chair, which groaned in protest. "Didn't expect to see you. Everything all right out at your place?" "No," Levi said bluntly, closing the door behind him. He walked to the desk and placed his hands on it, leaning forward. I found a child yesterday. A girl. By Flint Creek on my land. Brody's weariness evaporated, replaced by professional focus. A child? Whose child? Any of the local families missing a girl. I don't know who she is, Levi continued, his voice low and intense. She won't speak. She's maybe 6, 7 years old, malnourished, scared half to death, and she was wearing a sign. Levi let the word hang in the air. Brody frowned. A sign? What kind of sign? It said, "Not worth feeding." The sheriff's face went slack with disbelief, then hardened into a mask of disgust. He slowly rose to his feet, his chair scraping against the wood floor. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, he breathed. You're serious? I don't make jokes, Brody. Not about this. Where's the girl now? At my ranch. My housekeeper is looking after her. And the sign. I left it where I found it. Evidence, I suppose, Levi said, though his true reason was that he couldn't stand to have the vile thing in his possession. Sheriff Brody ran a hand over his face. All right, Levi. All right. This is ugly. I'll send a wire to the U.S. Marshal in Helena. Check the surrounding counties for any reports of a missing girl matching that description. I'll ask Doc Abram to ride out to your place, check her over. Officially. We need a record of her condition. Good. Levi nodded. Do it. In the meantime, Brody added, his eyes searching Levi's face. You be careful. Whoever did this is in our valley. And they're not right in the head. A person who'd do that to a child is capable of anything. Levi's only response was a grim tightening of his lips. He knew that better than anyone. As he left the office, the whispers of the town seemed to follow him. He stopped at the general store to buy supplies, not for himself, but for a child. A small hairbrush with a pearl handle, a bar of lilac-scented soap, a bag of lemon drops. He felt clumsy and conspicuous, the items feeling alien in his large hands. The storekeeper, a portly man named Henderson, watched him with unconcealed curiosity. Heard you found some trouble out your way, Levi, Henderson said, ringing up the items. Just mind your store, Henderson, Levi replied, his tone leaving no room for further questions. Doc Abram arrived at the ranch that afternoon. He was a kind, methodical man, with spectacles perched on his nose and a gentle demeanor that belied a sharp intellect. He and Levi shared a quiet respect, born from the dark days when the doctor had fought tirelessly and failed to save Levi's family. He examined the girl in the quiet of Lily's room. Maria stood by, offering soft words of encouragement in Spanish. Levi waited in the hall again, the familiar feeling of helpless dread returning. When Doc Abram emerged, his face was grim. The sheriff's report will be thorough, he said, adjusting his spectacles. She's suffering from severe malnutrition and dehydration. The bruises Maria mentioned are old, consistent with being grabbed and shaken forcefully over a period of time. The burn on her back is a branding mark. Levi felt the blood drain from his face. A brand. It's not a cattle brand, the doctor clarified quickly. It's a shape, a crude star, done a long time ago by the look of it. It was meant to mark her, to claim her like property. He paused, his voice dropping. But the most significant wounds aren't on her skin, Levi. The girl is in a state of profound psychological shock. She has retreated so far into herself that the outside world barely exists. The silence isn't defiance, it's a shield. Will she get better? Levi asked the question raw. With time. With safety. With patience, Doc Abrams said. He placed a hand on Levi's shoulder. What you're doing, it's a good thing, Levi. Sarah would be proud. The mention of his wife's name was a knife twisting in his gut, yet for the first time it was accompanied by something other than pain. A flicker of purpose. Days turned into a week. A routine of sorts began to form. Levi would spend his mornings on the range, his mind constantly drifting back to the ranch house. In the afternoons he would sit with the girl with Honora. Maria had decided she needed a name, a beautiful one, and had chosen Honora, meaning light. It seemed fitting. Honora still didn't speak, but the terror in her eyes began to recede, replaced by a watchful curiosity. She started eating small, tentative bites at first, then full bowls of Mariah's nourishing stew. She would follow Levi with her eyes as he moved around the room, and she allowed him to read to her from one of Lily's old storybooks, her small face betraying no emotion, but her stillness suggesting she was listening. One afternoon, Levi found a set of drawing charcoals and paper. He set them on the small table in her room, not saying a word, and left. The next day, he found a single, shaky drawing on the table. It was a picture of a tree and a creek. His creek. The place he had found her. It was a start. A crack in the wall of silence. The wire from the marshal in Helena yielded nothing. No child matching Honora's description had been reported missing in the entire territory. It was as if she had fallen from the sky, a ghost with no past. Then 10 days after Honora's arrival, a stranger rode into Black Creek. He was a man who seemed entirely out of place. He wore a tailored city suit, a bowler hat, and rode a fine-looking but travel-worn chestnut mare. He was handsome with a charismatic smile and eyes that seemed to take in everything at a glance. He checked into the town's only hotel, and within an hour he was in Sheriff Brody's office. His name, he announced, was Silas Kane, and he was looking for his niece. When Brody brought him out to the ranch, Levi felt an immediate and visceral dislike for the man. Silas Kane's smile was too smooth, his grief too theatrical. "Sheriff, I can't thank you enough for your diligence," Kane said, his voice rich and sorrowful as he dismounted. He looked at Levi, his eyes full of feigned sympathy. "And you must be Mr. McCrae. I owe you a debt I can never repay. My dear sister, a widow, passed from consumption 2 months ago. I was her only family. I was making arrangements to travel and bring my sweet niece Honora to live with me in St. Louis when she vanished." Levi's eyes narrowed. "Honora?" "Yes." Silas nodded sadly. "My little Honora. She was distraught after her mother's passing. A sensitive soul. She must have run away in her grief. I've been searching for her ever since, following any lead, no matter how small. It was a plausible story. Too plausible." "She doesn't speak," Levi stated, his voice flat. Silas's face contorted in a mask of pain. "I know. The poor dear. She has always been delicate, prone to fits of silence when overwhelmed. The trauma of her mother's death and then being lost in this wilderness. It's a miracle she's alive. A miracle performed by you, Mr. McCrae." Sheriff Brody seemed convinced, relieved to have a simple solution to a complex problem. "Well, Mr. Kane, it seems we've found your girl. She's inside with the housekeeper. May I see her?" Silas asked, his voice thick with emotion. Levi stood his ground, blocking the path to the porch. "What's the name of her father?" He asked the question sharp as a spur. Silas didn't blink. Thomas Vance, a good man, a prospector, died in a mine collapse a few years back. A terrible accident. The name hit Levi like a physical shock, but he let none of it show on his face. Thomas Vance, his first partner, the man who had helped him stake the claim for the Sarah's gift, before selling his half for a pittance to chase a rumor of gold in California, or so Levi had been told. Levi had lost touch with him years ago. The mine collapse, Levi repeated slowly. Where was that? Up in the crazies, I believe, Silas said dismissively. Before my sister met him. All I know is that he was gone long before his time, leaving my poor sister to raise Honora alone. Everything seemed to fit. Yet a cold knot of certainty tightened in Levi's stomach. This man was lying. The smooth, rehearsed answers, the way his eyes never quite met Levi's, the predatory stillness beneath the veneer of grief. "I'll bring her out," Levi said, turning before Silas could object. He found Honora in the kitchen, with Maria clutching a wooden bird Levi had carved for her. When she saw him, her eyes, which had begun to hold a spark of peace, widened in apprehension. She could feel his tension. "It's all right, Sparrow," he said softly. He knelt down. "There's a man here who says he's your uncle. He wants to see you." At the word uncle, a change came over Honora. It was subtle, but terrifying. The small bit of light in her eyes was extinguished, snuffed out like a candle flame. A tremor ran through her small body, and she shrank back against Maria's legs, her knuckles white as she gripped the wooden bird. That was all the confirmation Levi needed. He walked back out onto the porch, his face set like granite. "She won't come out." Silas Kane's charming facade flickered for a brief second, a flash of raw frustration quickly masked. "The poor thing is terrified of strangers. It's to be expected. Perhaps if I just speak to her." "No," Levi said. The word was final. "She's been through enough. She's not to be upset." Sheriff Brody stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. "Now, Levi, be reasonable. This man is her legal guardian. He has papers, a letter from his sister." Silas produced a letter from his coat pocket. "My sister's last words entrusting her daughter to my care." Levi didn't even look at it. His eyes were locked on Silas Kane. He was looking at a wolf, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this was the man who had abandoned a child to die. "But why she stays here," Levi declared. "Until Doc Abram says she's fit to travel, and until I'm satisfied you are who you say you are. My ranch, my rules." Silas's smile was thin, a predator's grimace. "Mr. McCrae, I appreciate your concern, I truly do. But you are overstepping. She is my blood. And right now she's under my protection." Levi countered, his hand dropping to rest instinctively near the Colt peacemaker at his hip. "That's the only law that matters today." A tense silence fell over the yard. Sheriff Brody looked helplessly between the two men, one representing the neat, orderly world of papers and laws, the other representing the raw, unyielding code of the frontier. Finally, Silas raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, though his eyes burned with cold fury. "Very well, Mr. McCrae. You are clearly a man of conviction. I will respect your wishes for now. For Honora's sake. I will remain in town. But make no mistake, I will not be kept from my family for long." As Silas Kane and the sheriff rode away, Levi remained on the porch, a statue of iron and resolve. He had just declared war. He had no proof, no evidence beyond a little girl's silent terror and his own gut feeling. But as he looked out at the vast, indifferent landscape, he knew the fight for Honora's future had just begun, and her past, a story tied to a dead partner and a rich silver mine, was a secret that this wolf would kill to keep buried. The departure of Silas Kane left a toxic silence hanging over the ranch. It was the quiet before a storm, a stillness pregnant with threat. Levi felt it in his bones. He was no longer just a protector. He was a target. That evening he did something he hadn't done in years. He unlocked the heavy wooden chest at the foot of his bed, the one that held the ghosts of his past. Beneath his wife's wedding dress, carefully preserved in cloth and a bundle of Lily's baby clothes, was his second Colt Peacemaker and a Winchester .73 rifle gleaming with gun oil. He checked the action on both his movements, precise and economical. He loaded the Winchester and propped it by the front door. The second Colt he tucked into his belt on the small of his back. Maria watched him, her face etched with worry. But she said nothing. She understood. The wolf was no longer hiding in the woods. He was circling the house. Levi's mind was a relentless machine grinding over the facts. Thomas Vance, his old partner. A good-natured, if somewhat reckless man, with a laugh that could shake a room. Levi had always believed the story that Tom had sold his share of the claim for a few $100 to chase a gold strike in California. It seemed plausible at the time. Tom was never one for the slow, hard work of silver mining. He was a dreamer, always chasing the next rainbow. But now that story felt thin, flimsy. And the girl, Honora, Thomas Vance's daughter. That meant she was the heir to whatever Tom had left behind. If Tom hadn't sold his share, if he had been cheated or worse, murdered for it, then Honora wasn't just an inconvenience to Silas Kane. She was a legal obstacle, an obstacle worth half of the Sewer's gift mine. The motive was now as clear as a mountain spring. Greed. Cold, simple, and deadly. But proving it was another matter. The first move came 2 nights later, a moonless, pitch-black night. Levi was dozing in the chair in Honora's room when a faint sound jolted him awake, the nervous whinny of a horse in the corral. He was instantly on his feet, the rifle in his hands. He motioned for Maria, who had been sleeping on a pallet by the door, to stay with the girl. He moved through the dark house with the silence of a predator. Peeking through the edge of a curtain, he saw them. 2 figures moving low and fast, heading not for the house but for the barn. A diversion. Or perhaps something worse. Arson. A fire would drive them all out into the open. Levi slipped out the back door, melting into the deeper shadows along the fence line. He circled around, the dew-soaked grass, silencing his footsteps. He could hear their low mutters now. They were clumsy city-hired thugs, not seasoned outdoorsmen. One man was splashing kerosene near the barn wall. The other stood watch, a pistol in his hand. Levi raised the Winchester, the cool metal, a familiar comfort against his cheek. He aimed not at the men, but at the lantern one of them had placed on the ground, its flame flickering. He fired. The shot shattered the night. The lantern exploded in a shower of glass and fire, the burning kerosene flaring up in a harmless whoosh a dozen feet from the barn. The 2 men yelled in shock and terror. "Drop your weapons!" Levi's voice boomed out of the darkness, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "You're on private property. The next shot won't be a warning." One of the men, panicking, raised his pistol and fired blindly into the darkness. The bullet whizzed past Levi's head, thudding into the side of the house. That was all the invitation Levi needed. He fired again this time, aiming for the ground at the man's feet. The dirt kicked up, stinging the man's legs. He yelped and dropped his gun, as if it were red hot. The other man, the one with the kerosene can, had already thrown up his hands, surrendering completely. Levi emerged from the shadows, the rifle steady in his hands. "On your bellies. Hands behind your heads. Now!" They scrambled to obey. They were a pathetic sight. 2 cheap, hired guns, later identified as the Clemens brothers, Ike and Billy, known troublemakers, from a town 2 counties over. By the time Sheriff Brody arrived, summoned by one of Levi's ranch hands, the brothers were tied up securely in the barn. They were full of bluster at first, but under Brody's questioning and Levi's cold, unwavering stare, they folded. They confessed that Silas Kane had paid them $100 each to scare the rancher off and create a diversion so he could slip into the house and snatch the girl. It was something, but it wasn't enough. "I can hold them for attempted arson and trespassing, Levi," Brody said, rubbing his tired eyes. "But Kane will deny everything. He'll say they're lying to save their own skins. It's their word against a respectable businessman from St. Louis. I can't arrest him on this. So he walks free to try again," Levi demanded, his voice laced with contempt. "My hands are tied," Brody insisted. "I need more. I need proof that connects him directly to a crime against the girl. Something more than a gut feeling." Levi knew Brody was right. The law needed cold, hard facts. He had to find them. His investigation turned back to Thomas Vance. He tore his own office apart, searching for any old papers, any correspondence from his former partner. In a dusty ledger from the year he'd opened the mine, he found what he was looking for. Tucked into the back was the original partnership agreement. It detailed a 50-50 split of all profits from the claim. There was no bill of sale, no letter, no document of any kind that showed Thomas Vance had ever relinquished his share. Levi had simply taken him at his word, relayed through a third party, that he had sold out and left for California. A third party whose name he could no longer remember. A mistake born of trust and naivety. This was his leverage. He rode into town the next day, not to the sheriff's office, but to the land office. He filed a legal injunction using the partnership agreement as evidence to freeze all assets and profits from the Sarah's Gift mine until the matter of Thomas Vance's share and the claim of his heir, Honora, could be settled by a circuit judge. The move was a masterstroke. It cut off Silas Kane's access to the money he so desperately coveted. The news hit Kane like a thunderbolt. Levi saw him on the street later that day, his handsome face twisted into a mask of pure rage. The pretense was gone. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and the hatred that passed between them was palpable. Levi knew he had poked the bear. Now he needed the weapon to kill it. His thoughts turned to Honora. The secret was locked away in her mind. Doc Abram had been right. Her silence was a shield. But shields could be lowered. He started spending more time with her, not questioning her, but simply being with her. He took her to the corral to see Odin, letting her stroke the stallion's velvet nose. He sat with her on the porch, carving small animals out of wood, naming each one. He gave her the whole set of drawing charcoals, and she began to draw. Page after page. At first it was just the ranch, the trees, the mountains. Then one day, a new image appeared. A house. But it wasn't the ranch house. It was smaller, poorer, and in the drawing, there was a woman with yellow hair lying in a bed. A man stood over her, his face a dark scribble, and a little girl watching from a doorway. Another drawing appeared the next day. A man with a smiling face, a face that looked a little like Levi's description of Tom Vance giving the little girl a small, shiny object. A locket. The locket. Maria had found it. When she had first cleaned Honora, she had found a small heart-shaped silver locket on a chain around the girl's neck, hidden beneath her dress. It had been so tarnished, they'd thought it was pewter. Maria had cleaned it and put it away for safekeeping. Levi retrieved it from the small wooden box where Maria kept her own treasures. It was simple, unadorned, but on the back, almost too faint to see, were 2 initials. T.V. Thomas Vance. He took it to Honora, who was sitting on her bed, looking out the window. He knelt before her and held it out in his palm. "Honora," he said softly. "Do you remember this?" Her eyes fixed on the locket. Her breath hitched. She reached out a trembling hand and touched it, her fingers tracing the heart shape. She looked from the locket to Levi, and for the first time he saw a glimmer of something beyond fear in her eyes. Trust. She nodded, a small, almost imperceptible dip of her chin. "Your father gave this to you, didn't he?" Levi prompted gently. Another nod. He opened the locket. Inside, there was space for 2 tiny pictures. One side was empty, a small, dark square. The other held a miniature portrait, no bigger than a thumbnail, of a smiling, kind-faced man, with a thick moustache and laugh lines around his eyes. It was Thomas Vance. Levi would have known him anywhere. But it was what was tucked behind the portrait that made Levi's heart stop. A minuscule, folded piece of paper. With tweezers from Doc Abrams' medical bag, Levi painstakingly extracted it. It was thin, almost translucent. He unfolded it to reveal a tiny handwritten note. The writing was cramped but legible. "Silas, you black-hearted devil. If you're reading this, I'm dead. You never took my share. It belongs to my Honora. The true deed is with the circuit judge in Helena, filed under her name. This claim is hers. You will not have it." It was signed Thomas Vance. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a legal document. But it was a dying declaration. It was the truth. Suddenly, all the pieces crashed into place. Silas hadn't just cheated his brother-in-law. He had murdered him. The story of the mine collapse in the Crazies was a lie he'd concocted. He'd killed Tom, likely thinking the deed was lost or that he could forge one. When he discovered the real deed was held in trust for Honora, he'd taken the girl and her sick mother in waiting for the mother to die. The brand on Honora's back, the star, was probably his mark, a cruel sign of ownership. Once the mother was gone, he only needed to get rid of the final obstacle. He hadn't counted on Honora being found. He certainly hadn't counted on her being found by the one man who would recognize her father's name and have the resources to fight back. This note was the proof Levi needed. This changed everything. This wasn't about property anymore. It was about murder. He had to get this to Sheriff Brody immediately. He stood up, his mind racing. "Maria," he called out, "saddle Odin for me. I'm riding to town. Now." He turned back to Honora, his heart full. He saw her pointing her finger, trembling at the drawing she had just finished. It was a picture of a man with a dark, scribbled face, raising a rock above his head. And another man, the man with the smiling face from the locket, lying on the ground. She had seen it. She had seen her father's murder. A noise from the front of the house made Levi freeze. A heavy, splintering crash. The front door. Levi grabbed the Winchester, his blood turning to ice. "Maria, take her to the root cellar." Now go." He heard Maria gasp, then the scuff of her boots as she grabbed the terrified, silent child and hurried her towards the back of the house. Levi crept into the hallway, his rifle at the ready. Silas Kane stood in the shattered remains of the front door, his handsome face a grotesque parody of civility. He held a pistol in his hand, and he was not alone. The two Clemens brothers, somehow out of Brody's jail, flanked him, armed with shotguns. "Good afternoon, McCrae," Silas said, his voice dripping with venom. His eyes darted around the room. "I've come for my niece, and for a certain piece of jewelry she seems to have misplaced. I won't ask again." The wolf was no longer circling. He was inside the house. The standoff in the hallway of Levi's home was a tableau of imminent violence. The air was thick with the smell of splintered pine from the shattered door and the metallic tang of fear. Silas Kane's eyes, no longer holding any pretense of charm, were flat and cold as a winter river. "You're a fool, Kane," Levi said, his voice a low growl. He kept the Winchester steady, its barrel pointed squarely at Silas's chest. "Brody will have you in irons before sundown." Silas let out a short, ugly laugh. "The good sheriff is otherwise occupied. A fire broke out at the livery stable 10 minutes ago. A terrible accident. By the time he figures out it was a diversion, this will all be over. Now the girl and the locket. Give them to me, and I might just let you live." Levi's mind raced. He was one man against 3. The Clemens brothers were thugs, but a shotgun in a hallway levels the playing field for any man. His only advantage was that this was his home. He knew every creak in the floorboards, every shadow. "She's not here." Levi lied, his voice betraying nothing. "I sent her to Helena with the proof of what you did to her father." The lie hit its mark. Silas's face tightened, a flicker of uncertainty in his cold eyes. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Levi countered. "A signed declaration from Thomas Vance, a witness who saw you murder him. You think a circuit judge will care about a paid-off local sheriff when he sees that it was a gamble meant to sow chaos?" While Silas hesitated, Levi acted. He dropped to one knee, bringing the Winchester up and firing in a single, fluid motion. He didn't aim for Silas, but for Ike Clemens, the man on the right. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, and the heavy slug caught Ike in the thigh. He screamed a high, piercing sound and went down, his shotgun clattering on the floor. Billy Clemens, startled, swung his own shotgun towards Levi. But Levi was already moving, rolling behind a heavy oak sideboard that served as the only cover in the long hallway. The shotgun blast tore through the air where he had been a second before, splintering the wall and filling the air with dust and plaster. "Kill him!" Silas shrieked, his composure shattering. Levi, now on the other side of the hall, fired again. He clipped Billy in the shoulder. The man grunted in pain, stumbling back, but not dropping his weapon. From the back of the house, a new sound erupted, the roar of Maria's old double-barreled shotgun. She had not gone to the cellar. She had gone for her own brand of protection. The blast was deafening in the enclosed space. Billy Clemens, caught from behind, was thrown forward, his shotgun flying from his grasp. He collapsed in a heap out of the fight. Now it was just Silas. He stood amidst the chaos, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He fired his pistol wildly in Levi's direction, the bullets thudding into the thick oak of the sideboard. Levi stayed low, the locket and Tom Vance's note digging into his shirt pocket. He had the proof, but he was pinned down. Suddenly a small figure darted from the kitchen doorway. Honora. She wasn't running towards the cellar. She was running towards the fallen shotgun of Ike Clemens. Her face was no longer a blank canvas of fear. It was a mask of pure, focused rage. "Honora, no!" Levi yelled, his heart seizing in terror. Silas saw her too. His face twisted into a snarl of triumph. He forgot Levi and turned towards the girl, the perfect hostage. He lunged, grabbing for her thin arm. But Honora was faster than he anticipated. She scooped up the heavy shotgun. She was too small to lift it properly, but she braced its stock against the floor, its twin barrels pointing upward at an angle directly at Silas as he loomed over her. And then a voice no one in that house save Silas had ever heard. It was small, but it cut through the chaos like a razor. "No!" It was Honora. The single word was a dam breaking, a torrent of pain and memory unleashed. Silas froze his hand, hovering just inches from her. He stared down at the small girl, at the barrels of the shotgun, at the impossible defiance in her eyes. That single moment of hesitation was all Levi needed. He burst from behind the sideboard, closing the distance in 3 long strides. He didn't use his rifle. This was too personal. His fist hardened by years of ranch work, connected with Silas's jaw with a sickening crack. Silas staggered back, his pistol falling from his numb fingers. Levi hit him again, a brutal blow to the gut that doubled the man over, gasping for air. The fight was over. The aftermath was a scene of controlled chaos. Sheriff Brody and his deputy, finally arriving after containing the diversionary fire, found a sight that would be told and retold in Black Creek for decades. Ike and Billy Clemens were moaning on the floor, being tended to by a grim-faced Mariah. Silas Kane was slumped against a wall. His hands bound his face, a swollen wreck. And Levi McRae was on his knees, his arms wrapped around a small, sobbing girl who clung to him as if he were the only solid thing in the world. The note from the locket, along with Honora's drawing, and the Clemens brothers' terrified full confession, was more than enough. Silas Kane was charged with the murder of Thomas Vance, attempted murder, kidnapping, and a dozen other crimes. The circuit judge, a formidable man named Harlan Blackwood, arrived from Helena and made short work of the case. The true deed to the mine, filed away under Honora Vance's name, was uncovered exactly where Tom's note said it would be. Silas Kane. It was discovered was not Tom's brother-in-law at all, but a distant, disgraced cousin who had been preying on Tom's widow for years. He would hang before the first snows of winter. In the weeks that followed, the house named Solitude began to change. The white sheets came off the furniture. The silence was filled not with grief, but with the sound of a little girl's tentative laughter. Honora began to talk first in whispers, then in full sentences. She told Levi about her father, about her mother's long illness, and about the dark star uncle who had hurt her. Talking about it seemed to rob the memories of their power. Levi, with the help of Doc Abram, began the official process of adopting her. There was no one to contest it. In the eyes of the law and the town, she was already his. The silver from the mine, once a source of bitter memory, was now a tool to build a future. He established a trust for Honora, ensuring she would be the wealthiest woman in the territory, but he also began using the money for the town. He funded a new schoolhouse, a proper doctor's office, and anonymously paid off the debts of families struggling through hard times. The people of Black Creek no longer saw him as a strange, grieving hermit. They saw him as a protector, a father. One crisp autumn evening, Levi and Honora were sitting on the porch watching the sun set behind the Garnet Range, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and red. Honora had her head resting on his leg, a stark contrast to the terrified creature he had found by the creek. "Levi," she said, her voice small and clear. "Yes, Sparrow." He answered, his hand resting on her hair. "Is this home now forever?" Levi looked out at the vast land at the ranch that was no longer empty, at the darkening sky. He thought of Sarah and Lily, not with the sharp, cutting pain of before, but with a gentle, bittersweet ache. He felt they would understand, that they would be happy. He looked down at the little girl who had resurrected his heart. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer feared. "This is home. Forever." The rich, lonely cowboy was no longer lonely, and the girl who was not worth feeding had inherited the world. Levi and Honora's story is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of circumstances, courage and love can forge a family. They found redemption in each other, proving that the greatest wealth isn't silver, but the courage to protect others. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to join us for more meaningful stories. Don't forget to share your thoughts on Levi and Honora's journey in the comments below. Thank you for watching.